Tampa Bay's business address is Money Talk 1010 AM and available on HD at 99.5 HD2. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Money Talk 1010 AM, Tampa Bay's business address.
The views and opinions expressed on the following show are those of Morgan Streetman and are not those of Beasley Media Group, this station, its management, or other hosts or advertisers. Now on Money Talk 1010 AM, it's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there will probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Here we are. Morgan Streetman has been doing double duty today and all week, I believe, because Mason's out, so you'll be in with the Sarge.
I'm up for it, though.
Right?
You know, I could do the double duty.
Hello, Pat George. We're back together again on Monday. And I do think, I was listening to your show, Morgan. A lot of great stuff comes from you and Sarge and putting your ideas together. One of the things that caught my ear as I was listening to your show earlier, and I think it's worth bringing up again, is a Convention of States resolution.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, 34 states have now passed? So what still needs to happen? And again, a brief description of what it is.
Right. Well, I think there's been, 12 or 10 that have passed something, and then there's another 10 or 12 that have something in progress. It's been passed by one of two branches of the legislature in the state. And then there's another 17 that have a bill that they're trying to get passed by one of the two. So in total, that makes 39. But you got to have 34 that have passed. So, I mean, we're still, we're less than halfway. Yeah,
okay.
We're less than halfway there, the truth be told. But if these other states were to go ahead and pass it, and this is kind of a long-term game plan that they're operating under. Obviously, they've been doing this now for 5 years. They've been campaigning for this. So if these other states do go ahead and pass it, then, if we get 34 states that pass it, we could have a convention of states.
And what that means is Article 5. Yeah,
it's Article 5. It basically means the states can get together, and then it's sort of not a well-defined process of exactly what can happen, but it's a meeting or a convention for purposes of amending the U.S. Constitution. And so what it kind of reminds me of, or what jumps to my mind, is what we just went through here in the state of Florida that's part of, again, our Constitution, but it's a regular meeting, and that's the Constitutional Review Commission. If you remember that process, if you've seen that in the news, that's just happened, and there are a number of constitutional amendments that will be on the ballot this year in November that you'll get to vote for based on what they did in that Constitutional Review Commission. Now, as a lawyer, we looked at this. I mean, we studied it. Some of our local lawyers, one of our past bar presidents was heavily involved. And so I've been to meetings on this, and I've heard a lot about this. And one thing that I could say is that the participants, and this is of the Constitutional Review Commission here in Florida, the participants did report just how difficult it was to get everybody on the same page on anything. Because they had a bunch of people that were appointed to this commission from all over Florida. And just to get these people on the same page, I mean, it sounded like Congress.
Laborious.
I mean, with the horse trading going on and things like that. So, what is the convention of the states going to be like? I'm thinking, okay, but 34 states of different people together. I mean, which could be, you could have people from Maine in the same room as people from Texas. And have you ever been to Maine and Texas? Those are very different types of people.
Sure.
They're similar in some ways, but they're different in other ways. And I just wonder, you put all these cats together in the same room, and you're going to get a cat fight, or is everybody going to get along? You're going to be able to herd those cats, and where we herding them anyway. But so I like the idea of the Convention of the States. Let's just remember, it's never been done before. If they do happen to pull off the idea of let's have one, and we get the 34 states to do that, I think it would be interesting. I think it'd be cool. If they can get that many, give it a shot.
And the Convention of States the panel would work to bring our deficit down, too. That's a focal point.
Well,
from what I understand, possibly.
Maybe. It depends on what the 34 states that are there want to do. And, of course, then if they were to get any amendments that everybody could agree on that they wanted to put forward as an amendment, they'd have to get 38 states. They'd actually have to have more people there than they need to call the convention. They'd actually need two-thirds of the states to pass the amendment. So if they're to be effective, They really need to start with at least 38 states. Yeah, because otherwise they don't have the votes to get anything done. But I just think it's going to be interesting to see if we can get people from that variety of states and different. I mean, think about all the different challenges and things that somebody from California versus somebody from Mississippi. I mean, the lifestyle differences, the cultural differences are huge. The things that people focus on when they go and vote are so different. So are we really going to be able to put everybody into the same room and magically something great happens?
That's why when they break, you don't get to ask for lunch. Everybody gets the chicken.
That's right. Or maybe they don't get a break until we pass something, right? You don't even get a bathroom break until something gets passed. Well, that could be taken a few different ways, I suppose, but passing on to the next story that we've got for you.
Yes, let's do that.
Speaking of interesting things going on, we got a little local interest segment to do this week. And, we've been holding this one for a while, but this is just absolutely fascinating to me. And it is that beach access law that got passed recently. I don't know if you've heard about this. I mean, apparently has created quite the uproar among citizens.
And I think it's confusing for people, too.
Well, nobody knows what's going on. But just this year, the legislature passed a bill that basically says that you can own the beach and you can restrict access to your private property on the beach if you do happen to own the beach. And so, what's been happening in some places apparently is people who own that property have been putting up signs saying no trespassing. And up there in Walton County, which is up in the Panhandle, apparently a lot of this is going on in the Panhandle where people are trying to restrict access. But this could happen pretty commonly over here, too. You think about even over at Clearwater Beach, there are a lot of single-family homes right on the beach.
How it's affected me personally is I have friends who, I don't get out to the beach as often as I would like, but I have friends who called me just this past weekend. Hey, where should we go to the beach? Where are we allowed to go to the beach? I mean, parking is so difficult at so many great beach spots. And then now it's the question of, are you even allowed to go there? Is it private property? And now what else this does is I've always loved the relaxing stroll down the beach where you kind of just aimlessly wander and wherever you happen to end up. And it's like, walk along the water. Now you can't do that. You get to a part, it's like, nope. You got to swim past this part because you can't walk on it.
Well, there's a lot of historical custom that goes into keeping those types of things open. And
Absolutely.
That's even, that's what we call it. Actually, we call it customary use, but you go back to, the Anglo tradition, you go back to England and you look at some of the customs that they have, like in Scotland, the ability basically to wander is considered like a customary right. So there really is no private property restriction in Scotland because you can't keep somebody from wandering across your property.
Right.
Or even camping there. They have these sort of rights that come from historical tradition. And this is one that, the idea of not being able to own the beach is one, and this is in a lot of places in the world, for instance, Costa Rica, where I've been a number of times, you cannot own anything on the beach there. That's considered essentially public property, like the condominium common areas. Nobody gets to own those. That's for everybody to use, and that's kind of like what the beaches are, at least I think, supposed to be. Now, I'm not against the idea of private ownership, but what this law does, like you say, is it creates a lot of confusion. And then we see right after it gets pushed through the legislature and passed, and by the way, one of the places that this law is being enforced heavily is down in Naples, where people have the money to buy a piece of beach. And they're basically like, look, I don't want all you dirty, unwashed masses spoiling my beautiful view here. So, you're not going to be able to walk on my beach. And I have, years ago, being down in South Florida and different places, and you've probably seen this, there are signs that do try to create some, this is a private beach. I mean, at the time I was down there, they weren't enforcing, because I remember being on that private beach and being like, oh, well, what you going to do? But this is where we're potentially going now. So now Rick Scott's actually had to come out because it's been such a fury has come from the citizens of the state of Florida over this law. And he's had to come out and enter an executive order, which he says is to clarify the law. I'm not sure it's really clarifying it. It kind of looks like it's backpedaling to me, but he says it's, created some confusion, and he's committed to keeping the beaches open to the public. I think that's really important. I mean, that's our primary engine of our economy in this state at this point is tourism. We cannot develop a reputation for being really unfriendly to tourists.
Right.
There are other beach options, although we frankly have some of the best in the world. But there are other options, and there are other places people can go. So we don't want to develop a reputation that, you come to Clearwater and you can't get on the beach somewhere where, you want to go. Like you're saying, people are calling you saying, can we go to the beach? Which ones can we go to, and where do we go? You don't want people to even have to worry about that when they're on vacation. So, I think we're going to see a lot more on this in the future. Daryl Rawlerson, who is the representative here from St. Petersburg, is actually going to be introducing a bill, which I always find this funny. He's going to be introducing a bill next legislative session to undo this bill that they passed this last legislative session. I guess they didn't... it kind of reminds me when we amend the Constitution in the state of Florida, and then a few years later we change it back and things like that. It's like, you didn't know what you were doing the first time, really? I mean, you got to undo it after 1 year later. But I think what's happened is they probably didn't give enough consideration to the political will of the people.
Right.
And apparently it's been something like 9 or 10 to 1 in terms of the calls that they've gotten at the governor's office and other places against this idea of privatizing beach access. So, people were up in arms about it. And look, now they've reversed course, or as they like to put it, clarified. When we come back, we're going to take a quick look back at some of the stuff going on in North Korea. We haven't talked about that in a while. And then we've got to get into some of this Trump supporter hatred that's going on, especially out in L.A., that we're going to talk about. We'll be right back on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. So much to get through. We didn't even get our quick look back story, Morgan.
Yeah,
so,
well, here's one
North
that's really...
Korea.
Yeah, it's fallen off the radar, hasn't it? I mean, it was the end of the world just a few months ago, and now we don't even hardly hear about it anymore. And, of course, no credit whatsoever is given to Trump. And I've even heard people, they've even challenged me, you want to talk about diplomacy. I mean, you're going to bring up North Korea again? You're going to try to bring that up? I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, look what he got done. The war's been over for years. And they've been hanging on to some dead bodies, some of our remains of our soldiers and servicemen. They've been hanging on to them for 60, 70 years. And you know what? All of a sudden, they flew them back. 55 U.S. servicemen. They had the remains of them. They flew them back to Washington. This is after Trump went and met with Little Rocket Man. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't think you can argue with that kind of success and progress. I mean, Trump didn't have to send a plane full of cash to get these people returned, okay? Consider that next to what Obama did to get Iran to release their hostages of the U.S. Remember, they wouldn't even let the plane take off with the hostages to come back to the U.S. until they were certain that the plane with the pallets of cash, the $400 million that the ruling regime in Iran pocketed, they weren't going to let our hostages come back till they had that cash in their pockets. Well, you know what? Trump didn't have to send any cash over to Little Rocket Man. All he did was tell Little Rocket Man the way the world's going to work now and how things are going to be. And look what's happening. Now, I'm not saying that the issue with North Korea is completely over with or dealt with, but you can't deny that we're making progress. And you can't deny that this disruptive genius that Trump appears to be, because that's about what I would say he's demonstrating. He's a disruptive genius. He comes in, he's very smart. I think you can't argue with that. And he kind of takes a disruptive angle on things, or something different than what's been done before. This is not the usual way that America's dealt with these people, and they're not really sure how to respond. And I think it's working pretty well for us right now. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. And he's going to be in town tomorrow.
That's right. Oh, my gosh. If you don't want to get caught in a traffic jam, maybe just go home and hunker down around 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Ooh, isn't he going to be out at the fairgrounds?
Mm-hmm. He's going to be at the fairgrounds at 7 p.m. for Ron DeSantis rally. And then prior to that, at 5 p.m., he's going to be at Tampa Bay Tech on a board discussion.
Oh, my goodness.
Panelist discussion.
Can you imagine what the traffic is going to be like?
They emptied the interstates.
Really?
I mean, yeah, the interstates will be shut down.
Wow.
He's going down at least all of I-4 to Orient Road.
Wow. That's
have you guys seen a motorcade before, the presidential motorcade?
Many times.
Yeah,
sure.
you're coming. Yeah, with Obama. I did.
I love it.
I'll tell you a story about a
that just gives
motorcade.
me goosebumps.
When
I
was a police officer and Reagan came to town, he came down Tampa Street, and they told us in our briefing in the morning, they said, do not turn around and look at the motorcade when it goes by, because if you do, you're not watching for anything that could happen as it's going by. And he was coming to the Hyatt. So they stationed me right at the Hyatt at 101 North Tampa Street. And I wanted so bad, you could hear the roar. It was like a wave at a football game. You could hear it coming, and you could hear the cheers coming. And I get goosebumps now thinking about it. And I wanted to turn around and look at it so bad. The next morning, they had a picture of him turning into the Hyatt, and there was the back of my head. The back of my head on the front page of the paper. I still have the And you know what? I almost turned around. They would have snapped that picture, and there would have been my smiling face. I didn't turn around.
Well, good for you.
You did your work.
That's right. You did your
Oh,
duty.
my
I
gosh.
saw the motorcade at the All-Star game in St. Louis, Obama's, and it was really cool.
Yeah.
It was just, blows by you, and like you just described, Pat, all of a sudden you hear the roar, like the wave at a football game or something, but 10 times more intense.
Well, one thing you don't want to hear is the real roar of the beast that's driving along with him. That SUV they always take with them that's got like the big 50 cal machine gun in the back that can just kind of come out of the back of it. It opens up and just, they carry a lot of firepower. So, speaking of firepower, how about these Cohen tapes? I mean, has that not been the media story to end all media stories lately? I mean, forget about all the good stuff that's going on with the economy. Forget about some of the benefits that we're seeing from some of this disruptive diplomacy that Trump is doing around the world. Forget about that stuff. Let's talk about whether or not he paid off a lady that he supposedly had an affair with a bunch of years ago, 10, 15 years ago. Let's focus on that. That's the most important story in the world right now. And, it's interesting because, Michael Cohen has obviously been put in the vice. He's been put under the squeeze of Robert Mueller and has needed to come up with something or another. And I think we have a clip for you that pretty well nails what he's doing.
Those guilty dogs are barking pretty loud.
I just can't get enough of that Louis Gohmert clip. I
Those
love that.
guilty dogs are barking pretty loud.
Exactly. And all of a sudden now he's trying to hand over his former client to the authorities. Now, a lot of people have said, look, there's, maybe attorney-client privilege communications, but there's a crime fraud exception to that. Of course, they weren't committing a crime. But let's just look at the ethical rules, because the ethical rules in the state of New York for lawyers, and they're basically the same as the ones that we have here, say that when you previously represented a client, and that's what was the case, is, Donald Trump's no longer Michael Cohen's client at this point. After that, Michael Cohen is not allowed to use any confidential information of his former client, President Trump, to the disadvantage of his former client. He's also not allowed to even reveal it to any third party or somebody who's not specifically authorized by the client to have it. And so what happened is these tapes were vacuumed up by the federal authorities in their dawn raid of Michael Cohen's offices, which is very unusual and offensive to many of us who believe in the attorney-client privilege and the way that things are done under the rule of law in this country. I found that raid to be very offensive, but they go in.
Do you think most attorneys feel the same way you do? I would imagine so, right?
I don't know. I think a lot of people, if they do, they're not vocalizing it because, anything that's bad for Trump, most people aren't opposing anymore. I mean, so they're not really sticking to any kind of intellectual consistency in things. But I think they certainly should. I think the way that Alan Dershowitz has basically been analyzing the whole thing is, I think, completely spot on. And it's exactly how I feel as an attorney about the situation. So that's why I've been liking his analysis so much. And you put him in comparison to a guy like porno lawyer Michael Avenatti, who doesn't seem to get the fact that, his access to this information is very, very wrong. It's should not have access to some of this information. But of course, I don't think he's really all that focused on the ethical issues. He's more of a promoter. He's more of a media guy. He's more focused on getting the attention of the media rather than, wait a minute, should I really have this information? Should I really be talking about it? It doesn't seem to me that he really cares. So my big picture point, though, is that he never should have had it. CNN never should have had it. It's clear that Lanny Davis and Michael Cohen gave the tapes to Michael Avenatti, because Avenatti admits that under cross-examining by Dershowitz, and they also gave them to CNN. Lanny Davis did. And They're not allowed to do that. This is something that was done to shame President Trump. And to the extent that they say, well, he waived attorney-client privilege, he waived it with respect to the prosecutors having it, but he didn't say you could take my dirty laundry out and publish it on the front page of the New York Times. He didn't say that. And if he didn't say that, then Michael Cohen remains obligated to keep his secrets, whatever they may be. And it's just offensive. I mean, it's offensive the way the media is latched onto that. It's offensive the way they don't call out Michael Avenatti for what he's doing, which is unethical. The whole thing's offensive. It's also offensive to our intelligence because they're trying to get us to focus on a payment to Karen McDougal, about something that happened a long time ago. And, they're not asking us to focus on what really matters to us, the people, which is immigration, the economy, and other things.
What do you think changed Cohen, really? What do you think happened that he...
It looks to me like when they got into that taxi cab business stuff, I think he's got something that he's done, and they're it's unrelated to Trump. That's what I think. And they're pressuring him using that, saying, look, if you give us Trump, we'll make a deal with you. We'll go easy on you on these other related charges. Now, what they are, I don't have any idea. I think it has to do with the taxi cab business just because that's such a dirty business. And, so I would just assume that somewhere in there he's broken some laws, and that's what Mueller's putting the screws to him on. And then Cohen's now trying to be Mr. Good Boy and just give them Trump.
Right. Now, something you just said earlier about how a lot of people aren't coming to the forefront to say, hey, intellectually, this isn't the right thing to do. As an attorney, we don't think it's the right ththing because of the backlash against Trump. Kind of leads us to our next story in a bigger way.
I tell you what, and we've been covering this a lot, and that's the inability of people to allow other people to have their own viewpoints. I mean, if you didn't see this, what we're talking about is this video that came out of Los Angeles last week. And this was a pretty interesting story, and it sounds like we're coming up on a break, so we're definitely going to have to get into this some more after the break. But, the story involves Joy Vila. You remember her. She's the Scientologist lady who's, I think, also a singer. And she's the one that wore that Make America Great Again dress to the Oscars a couple of years ago or something like that. And that's kind of how she became famous, was based on that dress. Well, she's one of the ones who was involved in going out to kind of what they call it is gauge how people feel about Trump out there. And, well, let me just say they got a gauge of it, and it was not something pretty. But it's really sad to me that we're at this point in our country where if we disagree with somebody, we want to stomp their heads in on the sidewalk or something. And that's about what winds up happening in this video. So, we're going to come back and tell you some more about that at Trump's Walk of Fame in Los Angeles on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We were telling you about a sad story that took place in Hollywood at Trump's Star of Fame that's been damaged. And Morgan, it's crazy the violence that ensues because people have certain opinions about things. And a documentary sort of show that you can watch on YouTube involves Joy Villa, who you referenced earlier, and her producer, and he was attacked.
Yeah. It's very, you need to watch this video. You need to get a feel for this mob violence that's going on, this resistance mob violence that's being fanned by people like Maxine Waters and others, and they're saying, look, confront people wherever you find them if they don't agree with you. It turns into violence. I mean, they attack these people. It's really a touch-and-go situation. You got 3 or 4 Trump supporters there, and now luckily they're filming. That may have kept things somewhat under control. But, with a crowd that size, looks like, at least several dozen people, maybe as many as a couple hundred. It'd be very easy to wind up dead if you got into some kind of a brawl out of something like that. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting was they were able to identify the guy who was kind of the instigator who really whipped the crowd up into a frenzy. They were able to find him through social media, that being Joy Villa and her producers and others. And they basically approached his mother, I saw, interestingly, and said, look, if your son will appear on a talk show about this, we won't press any charges. We just want to talk to him. So obviously they're going to get some, if they can, get some more media play out of that. And that's obviously why that's why they dressed up as Trump supporters and went down when they knew there was going to be a mob there. Was to generate some controversy, I'm sure. But, of course, there's nothing wrong with dressing up as a Trump supporter and going in this country wherever you want to go. It doesn't, just because a mob is there doesn't give them somehow the right to attack you.
Well, the crazy thing is, that there are a large majority of people who voted for him as well.
Right.
So you're not standing there wearing your Trump clothes saying you support him and you're alone, because obviously he wouldn't be in office if that was the case. It just is the group that is against him is so loud and violent about it. It's almost like we've turned into a country where we're following a sports team.
Yeah.
And there's Trump's team, and then there's everyone who's against Trump. And so it's just that it's even gotten more violent. As we know, sometimes following sports teams can get violent too.
Well, it reminds me, I mean, everything about our country nowadays reminds me of that book, 1984 by George Orwell. And it reminds me of kind of the way that they used to have mob time in the book, where they would all go out and scream about the countries that they were at war with, which, of course, shifted all the time. It was either Eurasia or East Asia. And then, of course, they would always be shifting who they were at war with, but never acknowledging that they had previously been at war with the other country, you know. And all, anyway, you got to read the book. If you haven't read 1984, it's fascinating, and it seems to be what's coming true in our country. Also reminiscent of Idiocracy to a degree. I mean, it just the level of discourse has gotten to be so low that violence has taken over. And I think it's really sad. Well, speaking of the level of discourse, we got to get to this story about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because while she may hold herself out to be an economist, which she does, I mean, she's got a bachelor's degree in economics, which I also have, but I actually really studied economics, by the way, when I was there. But that being said, you know, she's woefully deficient, I would say, in her understanding of actual economics and in her understanding, I think, of what she should be there to do. One of the things that she's really focused on is being a millennial and how life has been for her as a millennial.
Do you think there's a branding disconnect in America between some of these policy ideas, between generations maybe?
Well, between generations, I absolutely think so. I think us as millennials, we grew up in a time, we came of age in a time of 9/11 happened in middle school.
Right.
The financial crisis happened in college. We have never really known or grown up in a time of true economic prosperity in the United States. We came of age in a time of hyper concentration of wealth, with the very tippy top of people in the country and the world.
Right.
And so
That's the official designation, by the way, the tippy top, the very tippy top of people in the country and the world. And we've never been alive during a time of economic prosperity. Are you kidding me? You are alive during the time of the greatest economic prosperity in the history of the world, young lady. You have everything that everybody in the past could have ever dreamed of. You have easy access to all kinds of comforts and conveniences. You can get on the internet and travel anywhere in the world virtually using the technology. I mean, you are living in the time of the greatest economic prosperity in the history of the entire planet, and you're living in the best country on the entire planet to experience that prosperity. And you're complaining about being a millennial, and we've never really experienced anything great in our lives. We never had great things like all those people before us. Yeah, you obviously haven't read history either. And then I love this because then, you know, Trevor Noah, who's the one who's questioning her, asks her what really is a pretty softball question here, but you got to listen to how badly she flubs the answer on exactly how she's going to pay for all this.
How do you pay for these? You know, you always see people coming in with economic arguments, and they say, look, these numbers don't really add up. You know, in order to get health care for everybody, this is what it would cost. That's going to be troubling. Even if you reverse the Republican tax deal, that's only going to make up 5% of what we need to pay for Medicare for all. You know, how do you pay for education for all? How do you pay for all of these ideas?
So this is an excellent question. And in fact, there's a lot of back of the envelope stuff based on our values. So for example, I sat down with a Nobel Prize economist last week. I can't believe I can say that. It's really weird. But one of the things that we saw is if people pay their fair share, if corporations and the ultra wealthy, for example, as Warren Buffett likes to say, if he paid as much as his secretary paid, 15%, if he paid a 15% tax rate, if corporations paid, if we reversed the tax bill but raised our corporate tax rate to 28%, which is not even as high as it was before.
Right.
If we do those two things and also close some of those loopholes, that's $2 trillion right there. That's $2 trillion in 10 years. And it's one of the wide estimates is that it's going to take $3 to $4 trillion to transition us to a 100% renewable energy economy. So we got $2 trillion from folks paying their fair share, which they were not paying before the Trump tax bill.
Right.
They weren't paying that before the Trump tax bill. If we get people to pay their fair share, that's $2 trillion in 10 years. Now, if we implement a carbon tax on top of that, so that we can transition and financially incentivize people away from fossil fuels. If we implement a carbon tax, that's an additional amount of a large amount of revenue that we can have. And then the last key, which is extremely, extremely important, is reprioritization. Just last year, we gave the military a $700 billion budget increase, which they didn't even ask for. They're like, we don't want another fighter jet. They're like, don't give us another nuclear bomb. You know? They didn't even ask for it, and we gave it to them. And so a lot of what we need to do is reprioritize what we want to accomplish as a nation. And really what this is about is saying healthcare is important enough for us to put first. Education is important enough for us to put first. And that is a decision that requires political and moral courage from both parts of the aisle.
And so, the thing is, like, if we just would sit around together and sing Kumbaya, everything would be good, right? Everything would be great. I mean, I sat down with a Nobel economist, and then on the way over here, on the back of an envelope, I already figured this out. We could get $2 trillion by reversing the tax cuts.
Well, there are a lot of back of the envelope calculations.
I mean, this lady is a veritable genius. I mean, why didn't we put her in office earlier? Now, thankfully, she's not in office yet. But why didn't we put somebody like this? This hits so many sour notes for poor Sourpuss Morgan here. This crud about paying your fair share. I mean, how much do you think the tippy top, the 1%, actually pays in taxes? I'm just talking about volume. Forget about percentages. Just talk volume. They pay well more than half of the tax revenue, the 1%. So that little tiny part at the top is paying more than half the actual tax revenue that the government receives from the income tax. That is a huge amount. They're paying well more than their quote-unquote fair share. And what does a fair share mean? And anyway, this just gets me so fired up. There are so many little things that we could talk about here. The $2 trillion in 10 years. Give me a break. Number one, that's not much money at all. By the way, $2 trillion in 10 years. What are we running a deficit of $2 trillion a year?
That's what I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
If she really wanted to have a great cause that everyone of her generation should get behind forcefully, it would be bring down the deficit. Because in 10 years or in 20 years or in her retirement age, there's going to be hopefully not a major catastrophe, an Armageddon catastrophe, number one, but there's definitely not going to be any money to spend on social programs or,
or anything.
Save the earth or anything.
Right.
Nothing. Because
we're going to be totally bankrupt. We're going to be totally smothered by the debt load that we've given ourselves and all these unfunded liabilities that we've created in terms of, social welfare obligations.
Which, again, we always have to remind people that this huge national debt that we have is actually created by a small number of people.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. So, but I think when you listen to somebody like that, I wanted to just give you a little picture of what's going on in her mind, because it seems apparent to me just listening there that she really does not understand what she's talking about. Facts are sort of something that, if she has to put a few of them in there, she'll just make them up. She's starstruck by meeting with a Nobel Prize-winning economist. Give me a break. I mean, it's like you met somebody with a PhD or whatever. It's just give me a break. I mean, you're starstruck. You need to be questioning those people. You need to be questioning those authorities, not just lapping up any kind of mess that they'll feed you, which, apparently she does just lap up any kind of mess, because you heard at the end there she started talking about a carbon tax. What a joke that is. That is not going to solve anything. That's all about causing America to be subservient to the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, because they want the World Bank to be the place where those carbon taxes and carbon tax credits are administered. But the problem is the power to tax is the power to destroy. And a taxation is nothing but theft. And if you think your government takes the money, or any government takes the money and spends it efficiently, they don't. They take the money and they waste it. They waste it. What a debacle Obamacare was, and how much money was wasted on that, and getting people, getting navigators in place to help people navigate this new system that they've got to learn. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Well, we didn't get to our story on building the wall, Pat George, but I do want you to go ahead, because, I mean, those two maniacs, Ryan and McConnell, they better reconsider what they're doing with this funding thing, because as we well know, there's a lot of people out here who want that wall built, the illegal immigrant song.
I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Time to go out there. We have a great out there to get into if you like to travel, or if you have to travel for work. You never know whose eyes will be on you.
This is one of our favorite topics. I tell you what. I mean, from the naked body scanners to the free feel-up pat-downs that you can get at the airport. I mean, it's a veritable pleasure palace anymore. And some interesting things have happened recently that you may wish to be aware of. And that is, there was a decision out of the Third Circuit Court of Appeal in the U.S. that came out based on a case of a lady who was treated, pretty roughly and very poorly at Philadelphia International Airport back in 2006. I mean, so still 12 years later, still isn't getting any justice here for what happened to her back in 2006. And this is still ongoing. But finally, the appeals court has determined that the TSA screeners are not investigative or law enforcement officers, which means that they do not fall under the Federal Tort Claims Act, meaning that apparently, according to this decision, they're essentially immune from liability for things that might happen to you during the process of the TSA screening. I mean, get that? They're essentially immune from liability. Now, as somebody who always prefers to take the long route and opts out, and gosh, I mean, I used to see more people doing it. Now it really is just me anymore. And even you, Roxanne, we've talked about this. You don't even like to opt out, because they do make you feel like you're different. Like, who's the different person who's got to opt out? There's Streetman again. He's got to opt out every time. Like, he's important, and I'm like, well, I just like the extra services that you receive. But, here you go. What if some have been more aggressive with said services than others, Like, by the way, I'm not a terrorist. I'm not carrying anything in my crotch or anything like that.
Right.
So when they do these invasive pat-downs, some of them really have to, they talk about putting my hand up until it meets resistance. And I'll just let you imagine what the resistance is there. But some of them have been more aggressive at with how much they needed their hand to meet that resistance, and how hard they had to push on that resistance to make sure that it was the proper kind of resistance and not the improper kind of resistance in my crotch. And, I have to say, to me, having experienced very different levels, I could see how if they were a little bit rougher with you, they could actually injure a person. They could hurt you. And I think that they ought to be obligated in some way to be decent to people. I mean, I'm an American citizen. I have the constitutional right to travel wherever I want throughout this country, and they can't restrict that, although they do. They're not supposed to do that, though. And I should be not treated like a criminal. I'm not under any investigation. It's not like they pull you out because you look different. It's simply, if you won't go through the naked body scanners, which the MIT Technology Review says is not a good idea, and that's what I based my, decision to not go through them on, is the idea that, it could actually create mutations in your DNA and stuff, or so says MIT Technology Review, and I don't know, so I'm going to trust somebody that at least seems like an expert to me. So, I'm always opting out for personal protection because I don't want to go through and have myself be irradiated. But, I get treated like I'm a criminal. And they do the full pat down.
token line is, well, your phones are worse.
I get it, but there's a difference between somebody reading all your mail and stuff, which is extremely invasive, and then putting their hands all over your private parts of your body. That's about as invasive as it give a stranger. And I'm just of the mindset that, they're in the position that they could actually hurt somebody if they were too rough with them. And there's no liability. So I'm going to have to watch my backsassin from now on at the TSA checkpoints. Because I don't want to create any extra hostility towards myself for the screening process. But now there's another thing, and this is what's really getting out there. And because folks probably sitting at home going, Streetman, wow, that's not very out there. We know all about that. You've talked about that a bunch. Yeah, but there's something.
We're setting the stage.
There's something brand new that's just come out that nobody knows about, and that is Operation Quiet Skies. This is an operation that the Federal Air Marshal Program has been operating, that they basically assign air marshals to spy on you, like an actual air marshal is to be assigned to spy on you, the individual passenger. Now, they're not assigning them to every passenger. And part of some of the way that some of this is coming out is some of the air marshals themselves are coming out and saying, look, we're not sure why we're being told to, watch the lady in seat 2C very closely. But we're just responsible essentially to then follow that person around and write down everything that they do. And I mean everything.
So when I first read about some of this, it didn't bother me because I thought, well, if people are, checking out, if the air marshal's looking at that person that looks a little suspect or is acting funny, then okay, I'm fine with that. Make the plane safer. But You're saying that they're assigned these people in advance. They don't know why they're watching them.
Right. These are not floating air marshals who are out there looking for suspicious looking people and then starting to follow them. They get an actual assignment of who to follow and record the information on.
I wonder if I've ever been followed.
Well, I suspect you have.
I'm sure she has.
I mean, certainly if it's up to any of the individual air marshals, they're like, I'm going to follow this lady around, find out what she's doing. She looks dangerous. But think about this. They're writing down things like whether or not passengers fidget, whether they use a laptop computer, whether they have a jump in their Adam's apple when they swallow. Like, I mean, my goodness, you can't. I mean, I'm gonna be so nervous walking around the airport now. Like, I can't swallow because they might look at me and think I'm swallowing because I'm guilty or something. Or here's another one I like.
Yeah, I'm gonna start watching people's Adam's apple for that exact reaction.
And well, we could go a lot of places with that. And then you could also be noted as having a cold, penetrating stare.
Ooh,
which that's probably me every time I'm there because I don't like being in all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, you gotta check out. This can be found online. The Boston Globe just put out a major report on all this, Operation Quiet Skies, and this is really, really interesting stuff. I'd recommend you go out there and check it out. They run down the checklist that these air marshals are given to answer. Okay, and they have to, each question has a series of other questions that they have to answer. But I'm just going to run through some of them. Subject was abnormally aware of surroundings. Subject was abnormally aware of surroundings. So, subject was actually out in life paying attention.
Yes, they were not on their phone.
They were not on their phone.
That will get your attention.
That right there, arrest that person. How about this? Subject appearance was different from the information provided. So they're like, follow the lady in seat 2C, and well, are you sure that's
a couple pounds?
I've seen her Adam's apple go up and down a few times in the flight. I like this one. Subject slept during the flight. Maybe that one gets you off the hook, okay? That's got to get me off the hook because I just get on the airplane and go right to bed.
They weren't up to any shenanigans. They were sleeping.
I mean, this is the most nonsense stuff I've ever heard of. We live in East Germany.
They were plotting with their eyes closed.
What are we doing to ourselves? Why are these people following people around like this who aren't under investigation, who aren't suspected of having committed any crimes?
I get in the plane, I stare out the window for that monster that's going to jump on the wing and pull that engine apart.
You're the most suspicious one of all, Pat George. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.
The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were those of Morgan Streetman and are not those of Beasley Media Group, this station, its management, or other hosts or advertisers.
Tampa Bay's business address is Money Talk 1010 AM and available on HD at 99.5 HD2. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Money Talk 1010 AM. Tampa Bay's business address.